Back in the mid to late 2010s, there was a period of time in the game industry that we would begin to see a shift in how downloadable content could actually be done. Forever we saw map packs in multiplayer games and bolted on story-driven content for our single-player games. Midway through the PS4 and Xbox One cycle, however, devs began to shift on how to further add-ons occur. With multiplayer, we have seen the dawn of the live service game with microtransactions, skins, loot boxes, and the like. And in single-player, we get smaller, cheaper, standalone feeds of content, essentially distilling an experience down to a shorter size to give fans more of what they love and also be a cheaper entry point for new fans yet to be won over. In comes Dishonored Death of the Outsider, released by Arcane in 2017, less than a year after the launch of Dishonored 2. But as a standalone DLC, how does it stack up next to Dishonored 1 and 2? In this video, we're going to dive deep into Dishonored Death of the Outsider to answer that question. If you enjoy this type of review and retrospective content, be sure to subscribe to the channel and be sure to let me know your thoughts on the game in the comments below. If you want to support the channel even more, consider becoming a member starting as low as 99 cents. Links down below in the description. And I do promise that all my memberships will not go to hookers and blow, but right back here into the content to provide better quality videos for all of you. But with all the shameless plugging out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into Dishonored Death of the Outsider.
Another relic from the old days. Still holds an edge, at least.
At the core of Death of the Outsider, this game is a blending and distillation of both Dishonored 2 as well as the story DLC for the original Dishonored, that being the Knife of Dunwall and the Bridgemore Witches. We play as Billy Lurk, also known as Megan Forrester in the second game, as we search for our old mentor Dowd. If you've played the original DLC, you'll know these two characters very well, as they served as the catalyst for all the events that have taken place in the series thus far, that being the murder of Empress Lady Jessamine at the very beginning of the first game. It appears Billy has had some recurring nightmares, one where she loses her arm and her eye due to the Outsider's influence, now having located her former mentor in Karnataka, who's being held captive by a gang called the Eyeless. The Eyeless are a gang obsessed with the occult and the Outsider, experimenting and learning everything they can about the Void. Billy moves to rescue Dowd, who is being held captive in a boxing club run by these Eyeless, finding him attached to a device that is sapping Dowd of his powers. Upon freeing him, Dowd thanks Billy for rescuing him and asks her to help him on one more mission, one more assassination, to murder the man at the center of the chaos in the world of Dishonored, that being the Outsider himself. Billy agrees to help and the two meet back up on the Dreadful Whale, the ship we've seen in the previous game, ready to plot the murder of the mysterious purveyor of the Void. Remember when I said that we're going to be learning a lot about the Outsider in a future game? Well, this is that game. Returning to the Whale, we are visited once again by the Outsider, who is seemingly aware of the plot to murder him, and in taking our right arm and eye, bestow upon Billy powers, telling her that everything isn't as it seems to be, and that Billy has a lot more to learn. At this point, we sync up with Dowd, learning of a knife that will be needed to murder the Outsider, a ritual knife that was seemingly originally used to help create him in the first place, and thus, by logic, should be able to slay him as well. It's at this point we're off to the races, set out into the world of Karnataka again, this time to find a way to murder that who has been responsible for the seed of chaos in this world, one that we have seen in both games thus far, and seemingly a god, being the source of cryptic information and powers, all to sow the seeds of chaos within the world of Dishonored. Death of the Outsider is at its core a Dishonored game. We, the player, are dropped into a level with a set of objectives and told to solve them in whatever way we see fit. However, Death of the Outsider has a lot of tweaks into the formula that change it up from the first two games, making it a more streamlined and yet more open experience in the first two games as well. These two ideas feel diametrically opposed, but I promise that it all makes sense by the time I'm done. The biggest of the gameplay changes, in my opinion, comes in the form of the powers granted to Billy. As we have seen so far in the last two Dishonored games, not everyone's powers are the same, and here Billy is no different. Rather than having Blink or Shadow Pull from Corvo and Emily respectively, Billy has Displace, in which Billy places a marker of herself into the world that will exist there, allowing the player to teleport to it at any time as long as they're within eyesight of the displacement marker. This power at the front end felt a bit harder to use rather than Blink or Shadow Pull. However, once you begin to work with the power more and more, can lead to a ton of new scenarios that weren't possible with the other two powers before. As a movement ability, it works okay, but the way I love to use it as an oh shit button, allowing me to pull my ass out of a fire if either my plan went south, or even more effectively, being able to drop down to dispatch a target and instantly teleport back to safety, and honestly half the time before anybody even realized what happened, as long as you had planned to have your marker in line of sight appropriately, which I also screwed up a bunch as well. While as the movement ability, it doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as Blink or Pull, the utility of it really does bring new additions to the table, and really this power kind of grew on me after a long period of time. We also have Semblance, where you take the shape of another NPC while also having full capabilities as if you were Billy, allowing you to basically hide in plain sight. Or this is essentially to be able to move undetected, gain a lay of the land, or try to get into a specific location without triggering everybody to want to murder you. I think of the eyeless bar in the second level in the upper Syria district, where you need to go and find a NPC who's basically attached to a blood feeding tube for the eyeless. You could sneak in and find your way through using displace, or taking the form of a different eyeless, you could walk in yourself without having to arouse any suspicion, make your way upstairs before the power runs out, thus allowing you to infiltrate the area with nobody knowing that you exist. There's a lot of utility here that could be used, and I really love Semblance, honestly, as it gives you really that Hitman feel that I crave, the hiding in the crowd scenario. Our final power we have is Foresight, essentially pausing time as Billy leaves her body to scout out what's ahead. This power seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's just to also, once again, get a lay of what's ahead of you without triggering everybody to be super pissed off. You can also place a displacement marker in this as well, so you can more effectively plan how you can make a line over to the next area, leaving a marker, taking a jump onto the next light post, and then jumping as far as you can to displace over to your marker. It's a pretty awesome technique, honestly. All of these powers consume energy, and unlike the previous game, this one recharges over time and gets rid of the potion system altogether. A welcome change, if I'm being honest, and one that doesn't allow for the ability spam we saw in the last two games if you had just stocked up on mana potions. Unlike the last two games too, these are the only powers we will get, minus Void Strike once we get the new sword. And we get them all right at the start of the second location. I actually love this change for the simple reason that puzzles can all be designed with these powers in mind. I brought this up into the Dishonored 2 video, but when you give the player an option to play with no powers, this in turn must mean that the game must be entirely beatable with no powers as well, making the challenge level for the entire game to have to cater to those who don't accept the Outsider's blessing. This was the same for Dishonored 1. The baseline was much higher due to the fact that every player will always have at least the blink ability in their arsenal. That means if you bestow the player with 3 set powers, you can better craft levels, puzzles, and objectives to take advantage of those 3 powers in different ways. And it shows here in Death of the Outsider, as not only was this one of the most challenging Dishonored games for me, if I'm being honest, but also maybe one of the best level designs in the series to date. While nothing will compare to the Clockwork Mansion or a Crack in the Slab, all of the original levels here are intricate winding paths, full of verticality, multiple ways of infiltrating, and tons of nook and crannies to explore. This exploration is further aided by the introduction of contracts to the world of Dishonored. Contracts essentially boil down to side objectives obtained at the black market, requiring Billy to perform specific actions in the world in exchange for coin. These contracts will help expand the time in the world, giving you more challenges to perform to allow the player to play with the game's systems in order to make a bit of coin for upgrade, like murdering a mime in a way that looks like a suicide. You must find a way to A. separate the mime from the onlookers, which I did by striking fear into the hearts of the audience. Then I chased the mime down a back alleyway, knocked him out with the sleep dart, and tossed him off a bridge to complete the contract. However, much like anything else you can do at Dishonored, the way you achieve this end goal is up to you, and that's the main reason why I enjoy these contracts. It's the small dopamine drip of making you feel like the smartest person alive, something which immersive sims in Dishonored do really well and condense them into focus areas, each one bringing a new puzzle. Some of these contracts are meh, if I'm being honest, asking you to only complete a mission without being seen, but as a concept, I do like how these ended up playing out, and it did wonders to keep me in the levels for much longer. My runtime for Dishonored Death of the Outsider was far longer than it was for Dishonored 2, despite the game having like 3 less levels than the previous title.
Look at us, trapped here, an eternity on a butcher's block, waiting for the knife to
The other biggest change brought in Death of the Outsider is the removal of the chaos system, one of which I've had contention with since the first game of the series. While the concept of your actions having an effect on the world is one that at its core I do appreciate, I also felt that the system was the main catalyst for pigeonholing most people into playing in a less lethal, more stealthy way, taking out the main quality of the immersive sim, that being you playing the way you want to complete said objective of the level. It always seemed antithetical to the core design of the immersive sim, so color me surprised when Death of the Outsider stripped all of that away. I actually love this change as it felt like, for the first time, that I could play my way. Before, I would have to use quick saves and quick loads over and over again if I broke stealth or someone died as the result of the actions of the world. I would just zip back to a quick load and move on with my life. However, with taking the consequences of the chaos system out of Death of the Outsider, it felt like I had to live with what had happened in the world, rolling with the mistakes I made and somehow getting out of it, which was honestly freeing from a gameplay perspective. If I murdered someone 1, there wasn't a hidden tick against me, allowing me to roll with the punches as needed. For me, while there is a lack of change in the world based on my actions, the ability to act it how I saw fit without fear of punishment allowed the gameplay to feel more free. There is a trade-off to be sure, but for me the pros definitely outweigh the cons when it comes to this change. The other main change comes in the form of upgrades. In past games you could locate runes and bone charms hidden in the world in order to have some tangible change on your character. In Death of the Outsider, the runes have been stripped out as an upgrade token, instead having a trait associated with it, alternating your powers and movements of said trait. Couple this with the bone charms and actually feeling useful for once, and it feels like a lot more open with the builds you're able to make, rather than following the upgrade tree with the runes and having bone charms be less than stellar on the overall gameplay. While the sense of progression is somewhat lost, something which I feel that could have been addressed in a different way, I also felt like I was more tweaking my runes and charms more often than in previous games as well, changing the implicit traits to fit with the situation needed at the time. The prior games were hindered by the lack of respecking with a power or upgrade that didn't work for the given scenario, so having these be less permanent changes made good for some swapping and changing of how you were going to operate as an assassin. On a gameplay front, it feels that Death of the Outsider feels tight, changes made to help streamline the play experience and open up opportunities to feel like a badass, even with taking out all but 3 powers. While I wish there was maybe 1 or 2 more of these, having this number of options locked down made every puzzle and gameplay trial feel deliberate and crafted, unlike Dishonored 2 where the gameplay was great but cheesable for 80% of the experience. Unless of course you put your own limitations on the gameplay yourself, like no quick loading or no powers. Well, with the stripping of the chaos systems, as well as the new powers and gadgets, Death of the Outsider takes the shackles off of the punishment for murder, allowing the player to decide how to proceed. A freeing experience for myself in spite of the lack of consequences for my actions. All of this game, however, would be for nothing if not for level design in Death of the Outsider, which is something Arcane is definitely known for, so let's look at the level design here as well.
I thought I saw someone
have a
right
look
here.
around.
Let's check the place just in case.
It's safe to say that Dishonored 2 set a new bar when it comes to level creation, as seen in both the Clockwork Mansion and A Crack in the Slab. And while no level in this game comes close to even matching those two, the play spaces here in this standalone expansion are nothing to sneeze at. It would be easy for Arcane to just reuse levels from the games prior, and in going in through this experience, I was honestly expecting as much for at least half the missions like the DLC for Dishonored 1 had. So color me surprised to find out that there was really only one present here in Death of the Outsider, with all the rest being unique to this game particularly. Taking place in Karnaca, the art style here in Death of the Outsider is pretty much the same as its predecessor, which isn't bad. In fact, I really loved Karnaca if you had watched that video. Taking place years after that game, however, we do see a much more cleaned up and polished cityscape. No blood flies, high-class citizens have returned to the streets, and the inclusion of more civilian NPCs, the world feels more alive than in Dishonored 2, which makes the levels more interesting and dynamic. People don't just aggro to you right away, instead run to call guards if you do some shady shit, allowing you to make yourself scarce in the process. While the Fight Club level is pretty linear, as this is basically the tutorial level, yes, we got away from the segmented tutorials of Dishonored 2, you are soon set loose upon the Upper Syria district, I think I'm pronouncing that right, an area lavish with cash, bars dedicated to gangs of eyeless, and numerous civilian abodes you could rummage through. This area is cramped, from the main streets to the side streets, and yet sprawling in the amount of area that you can actually explore. And while there are no gimmicks like the Clockwork Mansion or A Crack in the Slab, this area is far and away better to explore than any similar spaces we had in the prior title. The amount of paths you can navigate, explore, infiltrate through, and hide in are numerous, and coupled with the contracts as well as the inclusion of the civilians present in the area, this space does so much more in making it feel lived in. It really honestly didn't hit me until you have to actually go and meet a journalist in a random apartment building that there is actually so much more going on in this one level than had been captured in any of the games prior. The bank heist mission brings us back to Upper Syria, this time at night, in order to infiltrate the bank to steal said dagger we mentioned before. I love this level, and with the multitude of ways to infiltrate and get into the vault itself, makes this level an absolute blast to play through. I must admit though, I am a sucker for heists, which is one of the reasons why I love GTA 5 and games like Payday, despite not having playing a ton of the latter. I love the idea of it though, and excited for Payday 3. The only recycled area is the Royal Conservatory. Now after the events in the prior game is now overrun with overseers, makes this feel the same, albeit with no witches inside of it. Now the final level, the mines, is way longer than any other level in this game, going in and out of the void while exploring the mine shafts, and while pretty linear in nature, has a lot of awesome iconography, shifts in enemies, and exploitable, which while probably the weakest of the mission areas was still a great time. The cultists have summoned creatures of the void, leading to the final encounter with the outsider, adds a ton of tension to this area, and allowing the player through specific use of powers and wall riding makes this level almost skippable at the end. Really adds to the I broke this game in a cool fucking way feeling. That is honestly super impactful. In all of the arcane games I have played, I can safely say that I haven't seen them truly miss on any sort of level. And what makes these levels so much better is the story wrapping around them. So let's get into the narrative of the death of the outsider, one of which I actually found pretty entertaining.
I can taste blood in my mouth.
Now, I want to set the record straight on something. I actually did love Dishonored 2 while playing it, but what really dragged the game down for me was the narrative of that game. And while I always believe gameplay is king, I do think narrative plays an important role in ensuring the player has a reason to keep pushing forward, to bring them into the next gameplay segment, at least for single player games. Dishonored 2 was severely lacking in that department for me, so color me surprised when I find out that Death of the Outsider has a actually halfway decent story, at least at the setup. After freeing Dowd, he explains to us his plan on killing the outsider, the mysterious figure he feels responsible for the chaos of the world, and in a way, he is right. Seeing him in the last two games, it revolves around giving your protagonist, as well as others, powers of the void, in order to either overthrow, murder, or manipulate those around them, including Dowd, whom the outsider had set on his path when originally bestowing his powers upon him. It's clear there's a grudge between Dowd and the outsider, and he believes he's found a way to kill him for good. However, given his weakened state, he asks Billy for help in his goal, and while disbelieving at first, she assists her former mentor in doing so. Scouring the upper Syria district and breaking into the bank, Billy finds the dagger in the hands of the eyeless, that which was used thousands of years prior in the creation of the outsider at the behest of Dowd. Upon returning with the knife in hand, Billy finds that Dowd is passed, and in memoriam burns the dreadful whale, as well as Dowd's body, in the final act of respect, while affirming to herself in her commitment to finish what Dowd had started. From here, Billy heads to the Royal Conservatory in order to find out more about where the outsider was actually created. Learning of the Shindari mines, once again I think I'm saying that right, and the Eyeless' fascination with the area, Billy heads there only to find that the Eyeless have set up an entire research operation there, studying the void, the outsider, and all sorts of otherworldly beings in the process. This place is strangely connected with the void, and in using an eye of the dead god, Billy heads into the void itself, where she finds that the Eyeless have also set up shop here as well, with the help of other creatures inhabiting the area. Making her way through, we find the outsider, stuck in a rock, secluded on a giant outcropping surrounded by spirits long past, one being Dowd himself. It is here that we see the outsider is trapped, prisoner to his fate because of a ritual done long ago, binding him to the void for eternity. It is honestly a sad sight, not further confirmed by what the outsider tells you upon entering the level, that she needs to find him before actually making the choice. He didn't choose to be here, he was imprisoned by force, which, as Billy intimates, would make anyone act out and cause as much chaos as humanly possible. We have our two choices here. We can stab the outsider, fulfilling Dowd's wish, or we can save him by convincing Dowd to utter the one thing stripped from the outsider long ago, his name. It turns out that the brand of the outsider is actually his own name, and either way, no longer being attached to the void any longer, we finally put this being to rest. I personally find that freeing the outsider option is far more impactful, with Billy pleading with Dowd to free him based on the circumstances of this boy just being a prisoner here as he was. In taking this option, the outsider can now live as a mortal, living out the rest of his days in the mortal realm, eternally grateful for the freedom he had been given by Billy. It's a touching ending, and call me a softie, but there's something about freeing a man from his fate he didn't ask for a bit heartwarming. While pretty stock standard by most video game narratives, there's a lot of world building here in this story, seeing the redemption of Billy, her coming to reconcile with her time with Dowd, who is essentially a father figure to her, and the outsider, a boy thrust into a terrible situation by those around him to essentially create a monster, ensuing chaos as that's all he'd ever known. With the outsider gone, it's unclear what will happen to the void and how it will manifest itself in the future, but in spite of everything, Billy's free to live the rest of her life, knowing the impact she herself caused to the world of Dishonored. It is unclear what we'll get next, but with the outsider gone, I personally would love to see Arcane take another shot at making Dishonored a thing. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that we're going to be getting Deathloop 2 here next. A tragedy, honestly, if you ask me, but one can hope. I adore Dishonored, the worlds it built, the characters it's fostered, and while there have been some missteps along the way, this is a series I've loved coming back to for this video series. Hopefully, you enjoyed it along with me. Let me me know in the comments below what your thoughts were on Death of the Outsider and on Dishonored as a whole. I love reading them and interacting with you guys down there, and I want to say another huge thank you for helping me hit this milestone of 1,000 subscribers here on the channel. I could easily be talking to a void, pun intended, but seeing the growth of the channel has actually been amazing and truly humbling in the process. Seriously, I can't thank you guys enough. As always, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. I would very much appreciate it. And that brings this video and the Dishonored series to a close. And so with that, I thank you all for your time. For all my new viewers, welcome. To all my returning viewers, welcome back. And my name is Brendan, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.
Died for the people twisted by his magic, the cults, witches, and killers. For all the madness and chaos they caused. For Dowd, for me. And after all this, I'm still just a murderer.